Hey everybody, it's Mike Venus La Soul, and I'm back. And I'm going through the second way that I approach making modular hip hop. Now, the first time, or the first way I explained in a video, was that I make generative modular hip hop, which is basically, I already explained it. So, if you haven't seen that, go check that video out. It's basically, that's whenever I'm like, look, my mind isn't really focused on crafting or writing out a great chord progression or melodic, sequence. I just need some random ass shit to happen to create some random ass stuff, and then I'll just chop it up and flip it. So that's how I do it the first way. The second way is basically just like anybody that would have a modular setup, either Eurorack or in my case, I use pedals. I use the Poly Beebo, right, which is a modular synthesizer inside of a guitar pedal format. So, you know, it's controversy. It's very controversial, but this is the way I work for right now. So basically, it's quite simple. It's the same concept when it comes to patching. It's just that I don't use cables. It's a touch screen and everything's digital. So, but the great thing about the Poly Beebo, it comes with some of, not all. I said in another video, I said all. It does not come with all the mutable instrument modules. It only comes with a few, but the main ones, the good ones, like I primarily, whenever I use this strictly as a sound source, I use the multi-resonator, which is rings, and I use the micro oscillator, which is plats, to get my sounds. So the way I craft a simple instrument, I got MIDI coming out of the Force, right, into the MIDI in to the Poly Beebo pedal. And I connect that MIDI in to the MIDI note to CV converter module. And then from there, I connect that to either Plats, which is the micro oscillator, or the multi-resonator, which is rings. And then from there, I come out and I connect it to two VCAs, which goes out to both sides to give me a stereo sound. And then I have the outputs of this, basically because my cables ain't that long, so I got it going through the Zoya, but the Zoya is on bypass, so we don't even count that in the equation. And out of that, it's going into the inputs of the Force. Now, the way I use this, when I create my drum sounds, hold up, my kick, snare, hat, I'm using plats. And the way I use that, I go to the sampler and I set it to 1 second. And whenever I find shape, the drum sound to my liking, I push arm to record, play the sound. It basically triggers the thing, turn it on. Once it's done recording, I edit the sample, normalize it, discard any extra length I have on the sample. If I want to basically take those two sound waves that was created because it's a stereo, make it mono, right? I can convert that, and then once I'm done shaping it the way I like inside the sample edit, I basically put it to a drum track, right? So I made this kick, snare, hat, right? And now on the kick and the snare, I double them up. I stack two samples so that it has enough punch, right, to my liking. And I like the drum sounds that come off of the plats, so that's cool. So I create my drums. Then, I make my bass lines. Now note, anytime I'm making bass lines or even the melodic stuff, because that MIDI note to CV is a single note transfer. So whenever I use that module, I'm basically using it as a arpeggiator or a ARP on here. So basically, arpeggiator is basically you're spelling out a chord note by note, single. which give you a melodic sound. So a cheat code, if you want to make your beats or your music sound more melodic without doing a lot, especially if you're using synthesizers, where playing a 6, 7 note, 5, 6, 4, 7, 8, those bigger chords, that shit might sound too big and cover too much space, especially if you're playing on a synth. So ARPing that same chord gives you a more, I would say, not wide, but a little bit more narrow sound, but it still allows you to have a melody and also have the chord type sound because it's covering a lot of frequencies. Cheat code. So yeah, I send an art pattern through there using the Force. I can either punch it in, or I could just pick a different art configuration from what they come on here on the Force. Trigger that, and I record the notes to a MIDI track, and then basically whenever I want to record that into the Force as a loop or as a sample, I can use the looper. Now when I use the looper, I just trigger the MIDI, I arm the track, I trigger the MIDI track, and it will play it according to how many bars I want. Then I go and edit it. Now usually it's some latency, right? So with that, I have to trim off a little bit of the beginning because it's kind of lagging, so it can line up perfectly. And then I chop it up and put it on the drum track. It makes it easier. Now I could do the same thing if I wanted to record straight to an audio track. I can go to shift length, basically your version of fixed length here in the Force. Set the bars, how many bars I want to record, and then basically arm that track and then push the MIDI track, or push record, then push the MIDI track, make sure that the audio track is armed, and it will play it as an audio clip, right? So there's several ways I can get the sound into the Force. And once I get it in the Force, I can manipulate it, I can chop it, flip it, reverse it, however I want. And then from there, I make my arrangement. So that's how I make modular hip hop using the Poly Beebo and the Zoya pedal. So I'm gonna play a little bit of what I did. So just the drums. Right? That's with the bass. Right. This sound, I created an arp. I shaped it by cutting out some frequencies with a filter, and then I reversed it. Right. Then I made this sound, shaped it so that it sits higher, so that it fits perfectly. Right. Got drums and the bass going. Right. And that's how I make modular hip hop, using the Poly Beebo and the Akai Force. So yeah, like I said, this method is a little bit, I just focus on using the pedal and create my instruments and sample it into the Force, then make my arrangement on here. Later on, I'm gonna show you the third way I do it. I mean, by using VCV Rack 2, which is free. So that's a dope way. But yeah, this is how I use it. So Let me know what you think in the comment sections. Until next time, y'all be blessed. Mike out.